Hi guys, so I'm here with my second part of the Widowmaker work log, and I am working on her little shoulder piece in this video. So what I'm doing here is taking patterns that I drew up and tracing those onto EVA foam and then cutting them all out. I released these patterns on my Patreon as part of a reward. So this part was a bit annoying because I had to cut that little W in this thick foam, and I didn't really have like any small tools for that, so I definitely recommend, if you're making her, having some sort of tool that can cut through foam very easily and in tiny pieces, like a foam cutter or an X-Acto knife. And now here I'm just using my Dremel to sand down and smooth out the edges as well as bevel them. So in order to kinda sorta sand out the W, I just took a Dremel tool, obviously, like you can see I'm doing here, but I just kept bending it certain ways, and I even tried to hand sand it down, but I didn't really have the right grit sandpaper for that, so it was back to just bending it as best as I could and trying to get the Dremel into the little tiny parts and hope that it didn't take off too much. So to shape the pieces, I used a heat gun, and then while it was still hot, shaped it and held it in the way I wanted it to be shaped, and that was basically all I did for that. I didn't record it though, but what I am doing here is attaching a thinner piece of craft foam to the back of all the pieces, because if you look at her little like reference photos and stuff, you'll see there's a bit of a gap, and it just might be where they angle in and like meet each other that creates that gap, but to make sure it stayed sturdy and it still had that illusion of having like a gap like thing in between each of the pieces, I just attached those all to a piece of craft foam and then cut off the extra once I'm done. So here I'm marking where those little holes in her shoulder piece are, and then I'm using a soldering iron to create them. And for the soldering iron, I recommend using an old tip or an old soldering iron because it can possibly ruin any nice tips you might have. So I didn't record the painting process that you already see here. Right now I am shading it with black oil paint. I prefer to use black oil paint even after using acrylic for so long. I had to go back to the black oil paint. It's just so much more worth it because it gives it such a much more natural look whenever you shade it, and it's a lot easier to blend, and it creates a lot more depth when you blend this. I didn't get to film the painting process before this, but it's just gray acrylic paint for the highlights and then gray spray paint for the base. So what this blue piece is just a transparent like folder binder separator that I found at the dollar store. I cut that down to the size I wanted and then am just using hot glue to glue it into place. I found this perfect fabric from Yaya Han's cosplay fabric line at Joann's, and it works perfectly for her little black pieces that have this sort of detail in it, and you'll see that with a lot of Overwatch champions. In fact, if you look really closely, I believe Reinhardt has it, and Reaper, and Tracer. But anyways, that's fabric that I'm using for her black part that has like this kind of texture to it, I guess you would call it. And what I did was just trace out the shapes that I needed onto it, and then I'm gluing that on, of course with like the W cut out too, and I'm just attaching that on top of the blue part because that part's supposed to be black. And that is all I have as far as the shoulder piece goes. I do have a separate video coming out for all of the lighting for all the pieces, so the lighting won't be included in any other videos except for the lighting specific part of the build, and that'll come out later. But thanks for watching. I hope you guys found this helpful or at least enjoyed it. Have a lovely day. Bye.